Well, our thanks as always to Home Street Bank for their support of this podcast. If you're looking for a bank that has it all, great people, great service, great rates, this is the place for you. This is my lender of choice. It should be yours as well. Go to homestreetbank.com. It's your one-stop shop for all your banking needs, both business and personal. That's homestreetbank.com.
The Earth revolves around the sun in approximately 365 days. When that happens in your life, we call it a birthday. When it happens on other occasions, we call it an anniversary. So, welcome to the first anniversary of The Buyer's Mind.
Welcome to The Buyer's Mind, where we take a closer look deep inside your customer's decision-making mechanism to reverse engineer the perfect sales presentation. Now, please welcome your host, Jeff Shore.
Wow, welcome to the first anniversary of The Buyer's Mind, the podcast dedicated to the psychology of making a purchase decision. Because when you understand your customer, you can reverse engineer your sales approach and watch the sales roll right out in front of you. Normally, you'd be greeted by Jeff Shore, our host, but today, I, Paul Murphy, the show's producer, have hijacked the podcast and will be interviewing Jeff himself. Having worked with Jeff for a little more than a year, I've found him to be a man of passion, inspiration, laughter, wisdom, and more than coffee-worthy. But before we get to our interview, let me give you our quote of the day. Today, our quote comes from Les Brown, and he says, "In every day, there are 1,440 minutes. That means we have 1,440 daily opportunities to make a positive impact." The reason I chose this quote is because, in many ways, it exemplifies Jeff. When he's not reading or recording podcasts, he's pouring himself into other people's lives, trying to make them better through training, sometimes one-on-one counsel, or just making his grandchildren feel like there's no one more important than them. He's like that with everyone, making you feel like whatever concern you have is important. He takes each of the opportunities given and makes a positive impact. So I encourage you to look at the 1,440 opportunities you have and think about how you can make a positive impact. Which leads to our sales tip of the day, which, coming from someone who has absolutely no sales experience, is be yourself. In ancient days, actors were actually referred to by the term hypocrite. On stage, they put on a mask and were one person. When they stepped off the stage, they removed the mask and were someone else. Don't wear a mask for your customers. If you've learned nothing else on The Buyer's Mind, it's that a purchase of any kind is an emotional decision. By being yourself, the trust that you earn with your customer makes that purchase a connection. People want to connect with you, not the masked you. So, go out there today and be yourself. So you know Jeff Shore is the host of the wildly popular The Buyer's Mind. He is also a speaker, author, and trainer for over 3 decades. And as a speaker, he holds the prestigious Certified Speaking Professional designation from the National Speakers Association. He's a member of the NSA's exclusive $1 Million Speakers Group. Please welcome to the podcast, Jeff Shore. It's going to be good to be interviewing you instead of you interviewing somebody else.
This is something that we had actually heard from one of our listeners, and Murph jumped on it, ran with it, and said, "Okay, I want to ask you some questions." Now, before we get into this interview, I want to tell you right now, I don't know what Murph is going to be asking me, so we're just going to let this roll. We're going to see how it goes, and Murph and I already made a side deal. If this is horrible, we won't air it. It'll just end up on the cutting room floor, and we'll pretend it never happened. But if you're hearing this now, then we feel like it went okay. Let's put it that way. Murph, the ground rules in place. You ready to go?
I am ready to go. How about you?
All right, fire away. Here we go.
All right, so first question is, what has been the best piece of advice you've ever received in your sales career?
Don't solve and don't sell, at least right away. All right, so when I'm looking at it from the perspective that the sales process is not about the product. It's not about the salesperson. It's not about the customer. Company. It's all about the customer. That's something that we listen to and we hear. We go, yeah, you're right, that's right. But if it really is about the customer, then what does it mean? It means that we don't want to dive into the product or the solution or the company or all the great reasons we exist until we fully understand the customer. So when I say don't solve and don't sell, it means it's taking the Stephen Covey advice: seek first to understand and then to be understood. And so I'm going to go with this one right here from Stephen Covey. And he says this, and it applies so profoundly to salespeople. This is from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He says, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to respond. And I have been guilty as charged of that when I have found myself in sales conversations while the customer is talking. And I'm thinking to myself, when you shut up, I've got something profound to say. This is really cool. I learned it in training. It's going to blow your mind. And the whole time I'm thinking that, of course, I'm not listening. And if I'm not listening, I am not understanding. So, I don't want to listen with the intent to simply reply. I want to listen with the intent to truly understand.
Good. Hey, so we have salespeople that write into us all the time and ask questions. And one of the ones that came up recently was that sometimes people hit a slump and basically it affects their confidence. So what advice do you have for a salesperson who's lost their confidence and feels like they're in a downward spiral?
Yeah, that confidence is so critical. It's such a good question. That confidence is so critical. And I think it's one of the more underrated or underappreciated aspects of greatness in sales. And the reason why it's so important is that we gravitate towards confidence. We respect and follow confidence. When you think about the captain of your sports team in high school, or when you think about politicians or company leaders, we want to follow confidence, not arrogance, confidence. We gravitate towards confident people. We look for those people who are going to look at it and say, I got this. I got this. Everybody calm down. I got this figured out. Well, our customers are no different. Our customers gravitate towards confidence. They do not gravitate towards arrogance. That's a turnoff, but they gravitate towards confidence. So I think for sales professionals, we have to protect that confidence muscle. We have to think about how we're constantly doing that. Bears a little bit of definition. To me, confidence is the intersection of belief and mastery. So if I believe very strongly in what I'm doing and the value that I provide and the service that I'm giving to my customers, if I believe in myself, that's half the equation. The other half is mastery. That is that I know how to do this. I can do it well. I've done it over and over again. If the confidence is lacking, it begins by asking, well, where is it lacking? Is this a belief issue or is this a mastery issue? Now, here's the good news. If you're in a slump, but you go to work on your mastery, if you look and you say, I'm really going to focus in on this aspect of my sales presentation, and I'm going to drive it really, really hard. And frankly, it can be just about anything at all. It can be a discovery of the motivation. It can be something that's that you want to demonstrate in a way that appeals to your customer. That is, in a way that your customer will really appreciate hearing it, whether it's overcoming an objection, closing, follow-up, whatever it is. If I look at it and I go, I'm going to bear down, I'm going to work on this, I'm going to work on it. I'm going to say this one line out loud 100 times today. What's happening? You're working on your mastery. And then something amazing happens. As you work on your mastery, your belief picks up. When your mastery picks up and your belief picks up, your confidence goes up. So the worst thing you can do when you've lost your confidence and when you're in a slump, the worst thing you can do is nothing. The worst thing you can do is sit around and try and diagnose what's wrong with the market that's causing you not to have sales, or who in your life is making your life miserable. That's the pity party has no place. What you really want to do is lean into that slump and work through it by repetition. Just pick something, do it again. Do it again, do it again, do it again. When you're totally sick of doing it, do it 50 more times. When you've got that mastered, your belief in your own ability goes up, your belief in your presentation goes up, and your confidence goes up, and your customer will know it. Bye-bye slump.
So it's one of those great quotes of amateurs do it till they get it right. Professionals do it till they can't get it wrong, right?
Yeah, this is a really profound truth. Very, very important to keep in mind here, that your sales presentation is the last thing you should be thinking about when you're talking to a customer. Now, that flies in the face of everything we've been taught. We're constantly thinking about our sales presentation. I would say, no. That's not the right way to do this. If you're thinking about your sales presentation during your sales presentation, then you're not thinking about the customer. And that's what really works out really well for great salespeople, is that they've got their sales presentation down so well that they're not thinking about their sales presentation, and they are totally freed up to think about the customer who's standing in front of them. So if I look at it, if I took an analogy into some other area, if I'm going to go to athletics, I play hockey. I'm on a couple of different teams. I play a couple of nights a week, and if I'm having to think about my stride, if I'm going to think about my stop, if I'm going to have to think about the specific spot that I'm supposed to hold the stick when I'm taking a slap shot, then I am situationally blind. I'm thinking so much about my technique that I lose the moment. If the technique is all second nature, if it's all built up into my brain, into that muscle memory, then I'm free to be able to respond in the moment, in the fluidity of the moment. Well, as it relates to sales, I mean, the application is very, very obvious. If I've got my sales presentation absolutely down, my confidence goes up, and I am free in the moment, not to think about what I'm going to say next, but to be able to hear what the customer is really trying to tell me.
So, Jeff, talk to me about one other aspect in here that I don't think we got a chance to hit on, and that is behaviors. What are the important behaviors that we're supposed to be following?
Well, when we're thinking about our success, our first thing to keep in mind is that our behaviors are always an extension of our thought patterns. So your actions and behaviors will always be an output of the way that you think. So interestingly enough, and ironically enough, one of the behaviors that we should be thinking about is, what do we feed our mind? So now we're going to get into a little circular thinking here. If I'm consciously, intentionally feeding my mind with that which will be helpful and positive, it changes my mindset, and then that positive mindset will in turn change my behaviors. So to me, the most important behavior that we can have is to ask ourselves the question, what goes into your mind? This is one of the reasons why we started the podcast in the first place, because I want to encourage salespeople, turn off this stupid radio. I wish the radio would just go away completely, because you are at the whim of what somebody else wants to tell you. And especially if you're listening to the news, I'm going to promise you right now, it's going to be negative. There is so much good free content out there for you to feed into your brain. So the first behavior is feed your brain the positives. From there, the second great behavior that I think marks fantastic sales professionals is that they are constantly asking how they can improve. There is something that the author of the book Flow, I'll never get his name right, so I'm not even going to try. It's a long and complicated name for us Americans. But he talks about having a sense of bare adequacy to the task. I love this concept of bare adequacy. It means I can do this, but I can barely do this. If we are overly adequate, then we stop trying. We start getting to the point where we're kind of mailing it in. If I feel inadequate, then I'm losing the confidence. I don't have the confidence to be able to do this. So the idea of being barely adequate means that I'm constantly got to challenge myself. I've constantly got to push myself. I constantly have to figure out, how do I get better? So I think those are two very important behaviors that you can build your entire sales platform around. What are you feeding your mind, and how are you constantly getting better?
Which you have teed up my next question perfectly, and that is, I know you're a reader, and I'm amazed at how much you read. So can you tell me, what are you reading, and why do you read so much?
Yeah, first of all, I am the type of person that at any given time was reading 3 or 4 books simultaneously, depending on the frame of mind that I'm in and what I'm trying to get out of it. But I think what happens here is that don't start, if you're looking, you're saying, I've always wanted to read more. I wouldn't start by picking up a big fat book and saying, I'm going to do this, dang it. You don't want to look at it from the perspective of a discipline, right? A discipline sounds negative in its tone right from the very beginning. I would recommend that you begin your reading journey by doing nothing more than flexing your curiosity muscle. Okay. So along those lines, I'm not sure that it has to be a book. I am a big fan, for example, of Wikipedia. I love Wikipedia, and I can spend a lot of time floating from article to article on Wikipedia. So, for example, my wife and I right now, I know this is a few years old, but my wife and I are watching the People versus O.J. Simpson, which of course tells the story and how it all unfolded. But when I'm doing that, or recently we've been watching The Crown on Netflix. But either way, I'm looking at it and I go on Wikipedia and then I try and say, okay, well, how can I learn more about that? Did that really happen? How did it happen? Whatever happened to Robert Kardashian? Or if I'm watching The Crown, I'm going to look at it and say, what happened in the crisis of the Suez Canal in 1959. I'm vaguely familiar, but not very familiar. What happened right there? And how did Russia get involved? And how did that eventually sort of connect through to the Cuban Missile Crisis? And so I'll go on Wikipedia and I'll just follow that line a little bit and I'll let it take me to different places. So first things first, I love books. I think books are the world's greatest bargain. I think Seth Godin said that once. But I will also look at it and say, you don't have to start with books. Start with the mentality of increasing your curiosity. Now, from there, I read books with only one thing in mind, and that is take me to a place that I can't get to on my own. That's the only criteria by which I'm going to read a book. Take me to a place that I can't get to on my own. So, for example, I don't happen to enjoy the books about the retired cop or detective who's now a private investigator, who's had a troubled life and a divorce in the background, and he's sort of getting by on cases that he takes from time to time, and he stumbles into this big scene that is involving corruption and, maybe a mob guy over here, and then there's a love interest because he's trying to save her life. You know what? I've read that book. I've read variations of that book over and over again. Those books do not take me to a place that I can't go on my own, so I don't read them. But if I'm going to read, for example, the best book I read last year was probably Amor Towles, A Gentleman in Moscow. Fantastic book that gave me a picture of what it was like to be a socialite behind the Iron Curtain in a time of communist Russia. An incredible book that took me to a place that I could not get to on my own. Or one of my all-time favorite books, The Biography of John Adams by David McCullough. I learned things about not just the way that the country of the United States was founded, but what people felt at that time, because so much of the books was written based on the letters that John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail and back, and you got to see the emotion that took place in there. I love a good fiction book. I love a good history book. Right now, I'm reading simultaneously two huge books. It's probably going to take me the entire year, but I'm reading Wayne Grudem's Systematic Theology, which is a huge, it's a massive book. It's 1,500 pages, but there's a corollary book called Historical Theology that speaks to how theology evolved. So I read part of Systematic Theology over here, and then I turn over here and I read Historical Theology to see how did that particular branch of theology evolve from the time of Christ through the Middle Ages, through the Reformation, all the way up into current day. I'm sorry, I know this is a long-winded answer, but I get really excited when I'm talking about books. And then, of course, I'm going to read for business. I'm going to read all day long. However, I can't tell you the last time I read a pure sales book. It was probably just to do a review for somebody that I know in the business. If I'm doing a book review, I'll read a sales book. And I do read them, but I don't tend to really gravitate towards sales books. I'm much more interested in buyers than I am in sellers. So I'm going to read psychology books. I'm going to, as you well know, Murph, Thinking Fast and Slow, one of the most amazing books written in our generation. Books like Why We Buy, Paco Underhill, Buyology, Martin Lindstrom. We had him on the show not that long ago. Anything by Seth Godin or Daniel Pink. I am totally into the way that people make decisions. And that deals with the neurosciences, with behavioral economics, with psychology. Put it in front of me. I'm going to read it.
All right. So speaking of, so we're going to set aside Daniel Kahneman and we're going to set aside Robert Cialdini, because I know those guys are big in your life. But yes. Who are your heroes?
Well, I mean, going back early on, I absolutely have to go back to Zig Ziglar. I read everything that he wrote. I listened for countless hours to his tapes. I can hear his voice telling stories in my brain. I never had the privilege of actually meeting the man, but I saw him speak a couple of times and was captivated. And one of the reasons why was because he was so real and so authentic in the way that he taught, but he also let you into his life. That authenticity was so profound that you got to see into his life. He was quick to talk about his beautiful redhead, as he called his wife, or he was quick to talk about his faith. I just really appreciated how authentic. So I got to put Zig Ziglar way up there on the top of the list. And then beyond that, boy, I would have to look at people that have just had direct impact on my life over time, who have just spoken to my life at different times and really had a profound impact. Guys like, and most of the people in the audience, they're not going to know these names, but when I think about people like Lisa Kalmbach, my first sales manager, or Eric Elder, who was an early mentor of mine on the marketing side, just Mark Schoenbrock, who really launched forward in my speaking career, or Mark Sanborn, who kind of took me under his wings and really opened my eyes about the way that I could run my business more effectively. There are a lot of names that people may not be household names, but I believe in the concept of the everyday hero. And of course, it comes down to Paul Brown and Eric Van Patten. These are spiritual mentors of mine that have really helped me to live out my Christian faith in a way that I like to think at least God would be pleased.
All right. Getting close to the end here. Okay. So let me ask you, would you share with our audience your formula for success? And how do you define success?
Oh, well, that's a big question, but I think success happens when you are doing what you truly believe that you are supposed to be doing. And now, again, our audience's members may not carry the same spiritual look at this, but for me, I am successful when I'm doing what I believe God wants me to do. So I am constantly evaluating the question, what am I doing? How am I spending my time? And does it fit under the categories of passion and purpose? So I believe in passion. I think that my passion is God-given. I want to do things that I'm passionate about, but I also want to do things that serve the greater purpose. They are beyond me. Now, that's not just about success in business. That's about success in my marriage and in the way that I raise my children and now my grandchildren, and how I serve at my church and in my community, for how I give. All of these things are aspects of success that fall in line with passion and purpose. So I think that's the goal. Now, the downside of that, I don't like to think of it as a downside, but some people will, is that means it's going to push you out of your comfort zone. It means you are going to be called to do things that you don't find comfortable. But if we only make our decisions according to what we find comfortable, we're probably going to make bad decisions. We're probably going to make decisions that complement us, but do not complement the greater good of the world around us.
Well, Jeff, I cannot thank you enough for being your own guest on The Buyer's Mind today. It's been great to hear your mind and hear your wisdom. It's just one of those things that I don't think everybody has had a chance to hear. So thank you.
Well, listen, I'll tell you what, Murph, I am blessed beyond what I deserve. I think I'm one of those few people whose life is as good as it is as I make it out to be on Facebook. I really have a good life. And my wife knows this. If I got hit by a train tomorrow, I have forbidden her to let anybody say, he died too young or he was taken too early. Look, I look at it from the perspective that it has already been an amazing, amazing life. I get to do incredibly fun stuff, and I get paid for it. I have wonderful clients that I consider to be good friends. I'm madly in love with my wife. I've got great children, and above all that, God loves me. And the next stage of my life after I die, I have complete confidence in based on my Christian faith that I will be with God. So listen, I could not be happier. Frankly, my prayer more than anything else is that I will still be faithful if the tables turn and life isn't going so well. So I don't want to put my trust in my stuff. I want to put my trust in God and live the way that He wants me to live. If I do that right, I'll consider my life a success.
Fantastic. Well, okay, there you have it. That was an interview with Jeff Shore on the anniversary of The Buyer's Mind. We hope in the year that you've been listening to the show that you've gotten a lot out of it. We really would love to hear from you. So if you want to ever ask a question, please write to us at ask@jeffshore.com, and we'll be sure to try and figure out a way to either answer that in an Ask Jeff or, if not there, here on the podcast. So we really look forward to that. If you haven't subscribed, please go to iTunes and subscribe there, or you can go to jeffshore.com/podcast and subscribe there. We also have the show notes ready and waiting for you. So go out there and don't forget to change someone's world.